Welcome to our podcast today. I'm Judy Fawcett. I'm a partner in the real estate team at Shoesmith's Leeds office. I deal with all aspects of real estate investment and development with a keen focus on residential investment. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Wells, partner and head of Leeds office for Allsop, who has extensive experience in all aspects of residential investment and development markets. In this short podcast, I'm going to ask Andrew to tell us about a couple of the practical challenges which this sector has been facing during the current COVID-19 crisis. And then we'll finish with a look at some of the potential opportunities that this sector might offer at the moment. Andrew, welcome. Thanks for agreeing to take part in today's session.
That's a pleasure.
The first thing I thought we'd cover is how you think COVID-19 has affected occupancy and rental levels. And then if you could maybe go on and say a little bit more about how operators are dealing with some of the more practical challenges that the pandemic's thrown up, for example, around access to communal facilities and the like.
Sure, yes. So I'm good to talk particularly about build to rent. So for listeners, that means properties specifically constructed for rent, usually with ancillary facilities such as gyms and communal lounges and so forth. I'm not talking about plain old PRS. So how's COVID affected occupancy? Actually, it's been reasonably helpful because people haven't had the opportunity to move. You know, it was only until the middle of May that the government allowed the housing market to unfreeze, and that meant lettings as well as sales. So since the lockdown period began, people have stayed put, and that has helped operators maintain income levels, and it has meant that the churn that you normally see in build to rent has reduced. Since the middle of May, when people can move, we have found that actually people are pretty happy to stay where they are. As far as rents are concerned, we have seen, as have other operators, that rent payments have been maintained pretty happily, somewhere between 95 and 100% of rent collected. So Allsop manages about 3,000 flats and houses in the UK. They're not all built to rent, about a third of those are built to rent. And in May, we collected 99.2% of all rent that we had agreed was payable. Granger, who you be familiar with, one of the largest operators in the market, they told us today that they collected 98% of their rent in May. So really good compared to commercial property and shopping centres and retailers. So COVID's been reasonably good for operators who have seen occupancy stay the same and rents pretty much collectible. The only difference, Judy, really has been those build to rent schemes, and there are a few where there've been student occupiers. And we have seen international students in May and April, return home. And they have been paying high rents in some build to rent schemes. And some schemes, if they've had student occupiers, will have suffered for sure.
Yeah. And how does the build to rent market in that sense compare with student? Because I guess you guys manage quite a bit of student space as well, don't you? And as you say, they've been, I guess, harder hit maybe?
Yes. I mean, the student market's a whole new podcast, Judy. It has been severely affected, and there's still a great deal of uncertainty about what will happen in September. Will international students come to Britain? What on earth are universities going to do with teaching? So, I mean, that's a different ballgame. Sure. If we have a look at the second part of your question, which was what are operators having to do, what challenges are there around communal facilities? Well, there are some challenges for sure. Obviously, these spaces are designed for social interaction and, for watching TV and for having meetings or for getting groups together. There's gyms, and we've had to close those because we would otherwise have to police the social distancing, and that's not something that most operators want to do. We've had to close the gyms because the government has said that health clubs, gyms, can't open. So most, I don't think we're alone. I think all build-to-rent gyms have closed. So we've tried to kind of keep the build-to-rent experience going by using the outdoor space that some schemes have. So we're very fortunate with 2 schemes that we have. They've got roof terraces, so we can allow people to congregate and socialize on the roof space with appropriate social distancing. And we've had to put on, like we've all done, some social stuff from a distance, like quizzes for residents, just to keep them engaged and so forth. I think the other final point I'd make on this about the communal spaces is that they're also a workplace for the managers, the on-site staff. And slightly different rules apply for the on-site staff because it's their workspace to the residents who count it as domestic space. And that little conflict has been quite difficult to resolve at times. And that's probably contributed to the fact that most communal facilities have closed. They're beginning to open now, and that's helpful. And what is really interesting is that despite build to rent being marketed as being a whole new experience with these communal spaces, and that's taken away from people, we actually haven't had people wanting discounts on rent or saying, I signed up to this lifestyle and I'm not getting it. We've found our residents have been really understanding, and
That's great. That's really
it's
good.
worthwhile.
Do you think there'll be some repurposing of this sort of communal space as a result of COVID and coming out of all of this, so that, God forbid, a second wave, that maybe schemes coming forward, perhaps not as easy to do with those existing, but that sort of space will be repurposed and there won't be as much gym space, or that the space would need to be a bit more flexible so that you could spin it into another use, co-working maybe,
Yeah,
if we get another lockdown?
yeah, God forbid we get another lockdown, but I think the gyms are going to stay as gyms because that's a big selling point for build to rent. I think the communal areas, if we all get more used to working from home, yes, there could be more space set aside for people's laptops and working outside of their dwelling, but still within the building, instead of it being a TV lounge or being meeting rooms. But the good build to rent schemes have quite a lot of space already set aside for working outside of your flat. You said co-living. I mean, that's a whole new concept of that's quite different. I mean, that's almost like cooking together as well. But yeah, there's let's face it, most build to rent schemes have ground floor uses laid over to communal because you can't really put flats there because they're on the ground floor. They might be a bit darker. They might have less amenity. So it's good use of space. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. Well, the other thing I thought we'd just touch on briefly as well while we're talking is where we think there might be opportunities in the market. How are you seeing yields and activity on build to rent deals generally at the moment? And what do you think is going to happen maybe to rent levels and deals moving forward?
Well, build to rent has been very resilient. You heard what I said on rents. And I think the institutions that have built to rent schemes are glad they've got them when you sit them alongside a shopping centre or a retail parade or a business park where rent isn't necessarily being paid. And I think this demonstrates the resilience and robustness of build to rent as an asset class. So we haven't seen much yield movement. I talk once a week as part of the major firms group with other valuers and agents in this sector, and some deals have happened during the lockdown period, big build to rent deals. There's a big £50 million deal in Barking in East London where there was no price adjustment. I think valuers are probably moving yields out 25 basis points, something like that. which isn't a massive move compared to other asset classes. And on Monday of this week, the material uncertainty clause, which your listeners may be familiar with, was lifted specifically for build to rent, which suggests that the RICS and the people who feed into imposing the material uncertainty clause are confident that build to rent as an asset class is strong enough not to have uncertainty. And that's a big move. So it sits now alongside supermarkets and food retail, ground rents, and industrial and leases to very safe covenants in being lifted from material uncertainty. I think the one thing that build to rent operators are worried about, well, there's two things actually. The first is build costs. So if you've got a site, its build costs are going to rise. Most commentators are of view that inflation is going to rise. There's a materials shortage generally at the moment because factories closed. So it could be more difficult to make BTR work in the short term if yields have expanded slightly and build costs have risen.
Yeah, and I guess timescales for deals might push out as well back to the supply chain and generally being able to get hold of all of the materials as well as how much they cost when you get them. Exactly.
The second point is it's going to be more difficult, I think, to see some good rental growth. There's no denying it that we're going to enter into a really difficult economic phase now, and furlough is protecting many people and the economy generally. As furlough is lifted, we are probably going to see more redundancies, and that will impact the residential rented sector because people won't be able to afford the levels of rent they might previously, and voids might increase. But whichever way you cut it, it's going to be difficult, I think, for operators to get 2%, 3% rental growth over the next couple of years, because they'll be just pleased to have an occupant paying the current level of rent rather than trying to ramp it up. So that's a challenge, and that goes to value as well. So there's three factors affecting value. There's build costs, there's the absence of rental growth, and there's the increased voids potentially, which don't help us.
No, but I guess hope, with every cloud comes a potential silver lining. I know there's a lot of concern in the build to sell market as well around the ability to sell and people's ability to get mortgages, and the LTV rates being so high at the moment that maybe people who would want to buy might actually choose in the short to medium term to rent instead.
Yeah, and this is the great thing about rental, is that if you look past the last 50 years, rental has gone counter-cyclical to sales. And when we have a poor sales market, the rental market does improve, and people want flexibility and ability to move quickly, so they rent instead. So that's a very salient point. I think the other factor is if build costs rise, sure, that doesn't help the build to rent developer, but it would be the land value, if the land value isn't already agreed, that would shrink to accommodate that. And generally speaking, land values, I think, particularly in city centres, have been quite high recently because of competing uses, office development and so forth. If land values fall a bit, then build to rent will be protected because it'll still work off a lower land value.
Excellent. So all in all, reasons to be cheerful.
Well, it's a great sector to be in, build to rent, and those that are in it already are feeling, I wouldn't say they're smug, but they're feeling comfortable that they made the right choice, and it's a sustainable income stream, which can't be said for all other sectors.
Right. That's all we've got time for today, but a big thank you, Andrew, for your thoughts, and thank you to everyone listening. So this is one of a number of podcasts that we're putting together in this living sector. So do look out on the website for others. And then finally, if there are any other points raised today which any of you want to discuss further, or if Andrew or myself can be of any help with anything you're dealing with, then please don't hesitate to get in touch.